So I kind of cheated on Shop Your Stash Summer recently. Yes, me, the queen of lines, the queen of get the look with what you have. Let me show you what I bought, and we can talk about how to know when it's okay to take a break from shopping your stash. Here's the product. It's a cover plate die from Pinkfresh Studio. It doesn't look that exciting here, does it? But you guys, I'm in love with this. So I'll be doing a bit of a deep dive with it while we're talking. You know I love a good acronym, and I came up with this one, CREATE. C stands for catching attention. There's so much product out there, how do you even find the things that'll fit your style? R stands for repeat, and that means, do you already have something similar? E stands for easy, and what I mean by this is that it actually works the way it's meant to. In this case, does the die cut cleanly? A stands for alone. Can you use it on its own? T stands for teamwork. Can it be used with other items you already own? E stands for endless, as in how many ways you can use it. Let's start at the beginning. There's a lot of ways that products can catch your attention. Maybe you have favorite companies and you get newsletters. Maybe you see your favorite YouTuber use something, or on Instagram. Does anyone do blog hops anymore, or am I dating myself? I happened to come across this die in the news section of an online stamping store, and honestly, I wasn't immediately sold on it. I thought it looked interesting, but then if you look closely at the die itself, you can see kind of points on the shapes inside the dots, right? And I couldn't really see how it would cut. When I saw that, I thought, oh, it's so close, but not exactly what I want. Then I looked at the photos of the sample cards, and I could see right away that it is exactly what I like. Dots joined together in perfect precision and great for geometric backgrounds. Next, I thought about what I already have. If you've been here for a while, you know I love circles and dots and geometrics, and I have lots of ways to cut circles and dots, but nothing that creates a uniform background like this. So I added it to cart. Once the die arrived here, I started by cutting it. This die cut is exactly 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so I actually needed to cut it from a larger piece of cardstock instead of one of my pre-cut panels. That's a small negative in the ease of use category, but it cuts beautifully and the pieces fell out easily the first time I cut it. This is actually the second time I cut it, and I've been experimenting with sandwiches in my Big Shot, so this time they didn't fall out on their own, but they did come out cleanly. This just took me a couple of minutes to pop out all those little diamonds, and I kept them. We're going to come back to that. Another selling point for me is that I can recut this on one side to make it into a square. There are 9 circles across, so I counted 9 circles down the long side, and then I put the die cut back into the die so that the edge is at the 9th dot. You'll feel it almost kind of click into place. Now, many of you are not going to want to make a square, but there is more you can do with it. So here's my square. Cool, right? And of course you have the end bit, and you can see that one edge is not really usable because of how the die cuts it. But we can cut that bit off and get a double row of dots that we can use. And really, you can cut what you like, smaller rectangles or squares, and I'll show you some of those as we go. So let's see how this stands on its own by using it very simply. I grabbed some background panels from my stash to use, and I chose this one, which is a gel print made with a couple of colors of Catherine Pooler inks. I cut it with the die, and then I cut it again to make a square. And you can see that will completely fill my square card. But I like a nice white border. So I grabbed the die and I cut 1 row of circles off each side to create an 8 by 8 square. To jazz this simple design up a little bit, I put a tiny piece of foam behind each dot. This took a minute for sure, but I have a couple of thoughts on that. First, the look. By popping this up, there will be dimension and shadows created, which adds visual interest to the simplicity of the design. And second, I may not have needed the foam on every single dot. I probably could have skipped a few in the center, but I love a sturdy, well-supported panel, so that's what I did. And hey, I didn't even add shimmer spray to this. To finish this simply so the die cut really is the focal point, I chose a circular sentiment from Avery Elle and I matted it with a larger Stampin' Up! Circle die, cut from honey gold cardstock, and I added a few honey gold dots as my embellishments. Here's another way to make this die cut the focal point. I cut one of my backgrounds down to a square that fits just inside the 9 by 9 design. I want it to show through all the diamonds, but not around the edges. At least that's what I thought I wanted at this point. I put glue on most of the dots and then I laid the background onto it so I could get it positioned just right. I finished this one with a stacked up, mixed up sentiment. The happy is from LDRS Creative and the script birthday is from scrapbook.com. If I had left the red background at 4¼ inches, I think I would have gotten more definition of the curved edges of the die cut, so that's another look you could try. And P.S. This is a great way to use up any ugly background panels you have in your stash. You just see the little pops of color and none of the mistakes you might have made. Speaking of edges, how about this? This time I used another background cut to a 9x9 square, and then I cut it with a square die that fit just inside the edges. So that's a totally different look, and maybe we're bordering on plays well with other supplies I already own, but I still think that the focal point of this card is that background. I added a honey gold LDRS thanks and some little dots in a couple of rows of the diamonds. It's simple, but with some fun little details that really make a difference. Next, how about inlaying the diamonds back into the die cut? I cut it to 7x7 this time, so it's a little smaller and there would be fewer to do. I put a square of cardstock behind the die cut, and it's totally coated with tape runner, so there's a sticky place for each diamond to land. And I used Copics to color the diamonds. There's 36 in total, and I have 4 colors, so that's 9 each. This is a little fiddly, and if you like the look, you could do something similar by putting colors underneath the die cut, like I did with that pink and red background earlier. Once I got them all inlaid, I trimmed the panel over and I rubbed it hard to make sure they were all stuck in well, and then I grabbed my card base. I remember that feeling of wanting more definition, so I cut a slightly bigger square and I colored it with that same navy marker to be sure it would match. I only had to do the outside edges since my inlaid panel will cover the white center. I used that same Avery Elle birthday sentiment along with a different circle die from my gold mat. This one's from Waffle and has some stitching on it. Okay, now let's move on to teamwork and see how this die plays with others. Let's start simple again. Here I used a 9x9 white panel flat on a white card to just add a little subtle interest to the background. I blended ink onto some tulip die cuts from Pretty Pink Posh using the Aquatini for the stem and the pink and yellow for the flowers. I love the simple shape of these flowers. For my sentiment, I used a Paper Rose Hello, and because I had so much space left, I used the shadow layer and colored it with the navy ink so that I had all 4 of my colors incorporated. Not only is this die cut playing well with others, it's really actually taking a back seat, isn't it? Almost disappearing, and that speaks to the versatility of this die. Next, I cut a 7x7 square and I grabbed a solid dot stamp. You could use a different shape if you had it, like a heart or a star. And I had this idea that I would stamp my colors in a pattern, leaving 1 dot white in each sequence. But in the end, I didn't like it as much as I thought I would, and I wanted to add a color. I find when this happens, the best thing to do is add either a neutral, like a gray, or a lighter shade of one of the colors you're already using. And what a great opportunity to use one of Catherine's latest colors, Sweetheart. It goes perfectly with Dragon Fruit, and it's a fun addition to my lineup, I think. I popped this panel up again to get those shadows, and because of the amount of color and how the dots echo the edges of the die cut panel, this time I didn't put a mat behind it, and I like the airy feel of this. I finished it with a simple happy birthday from Julie Hickey. Finally, this card has a lot of ideas packed into it. First, I started with a 9x9 panel, and I didn't even pop out all the diamonds because I put a square panel over the center, and now I'm using that cover plate die to create a frame. Fun, right? And of course, I have the leftovers, which I cut to a double row of dots, but then I had a rethink and I cut it down to just 1 row. And that 1 row is a perfect place for a sentiment, I think. And I pulled out the Best Friends Vibes set from Concord and Ninth. It has a little alphabet that you can use to make paper friendship bracelets, and it'll work perfectly here. To show that this die can work all year long, I'm making a Christmas card, and Christmas has 9 letters. And when I checked, this alphabet actually has 2 S's, which means I only have to stamp it once. I cut all my little beads out with the coordinating circle die, and I pulled out the letters I needed. I put the extras into a little bag that I have that's filled with all the different leftover beads and letters I've made from previous projects. Next, I used the Samba ink from the letters to color the single row of dots, and I inked both sides of it to limit the amount of white showing. Sometimes when I cut down to 1 row, the cardstock almost shifts a tiny bit in the die, and I get little hairs or rough edges, so this will help to ensure that it looks as red as possible. I also inked up some cardstock with Samba, as well as Aquatini, and finally Lime Ricky. I have these two dies that cut separate dots that are slightly smaller than the Concordinite circle beads, but you could use that die for more coverage if you want. You'll see what I mean in a second. Now that's a lot of prep, and it's finally time for assembly. I started by gluing the letters to the strip of dots. It's a little fiddly to get them centered and straight up and down, so you could make this easier if you wanted by having them all be a little wonky. That would be fun. The only thing I think wouldn't work is if you had most of them straight and a couple just off a bit. You know what I mean? So now the Christmas word is going to fit right here with my Sign and Says stamp Mary die cut just above it. The tail of the Y is a little awkward, but I think I can make that work by stacking it up with a couple of white die cuts underneath it, but then cutting off the tail of the Y. That part of the red die cut can just sit on top of the dot letters, which are already a couple of layers thick. And just before I glued that red Mary on top, I wondered if gold would be better. It would incorporate some shine and also provide some contrast between the Y in the die cut and the red letters in the Christmas. Oh yeah, I like that better. Then I added my colored dots to the white frame. You could stamp them if you prefer, or again, you could use different shapes. A little star or holly or something like that would be good here, but I'm happy to stick with dots. The numbers weren't perfect, so I had to do a little finagling to make sure I didn't have any dots in the same color next to each other, but in the end, I think this is a happy looking panel. Maybe it just needs a few little embellishments. And that reminded me that I actually bought another cover plate die recently. This is the Memory Box Bubble Dots cover plate, and I didn't buy it to make backgrounds, although I probably will. I bought it because I love to make my own embellishments, and there's lots of little dots of different sizes here. I cut just half of a panel of honey gold cardstock with the die, and I ended up with lots of little dots to add to my card as well as to my container for future cards. This cover plate checked all the create boxes for me, but even if what you're looking for doesn't tick all the boxes, you may still want to buy it. I don't think all the criteria have to be weighted evenly. Like this cover plate die. I know I'll probably only use it to create little dots, and I'll probably create them on pretty much every card I make. You may decide to buy something fiddly because the look you want is worth the extra work. Or maybe you love a product precisely because you're branching out and trying something new and it doesn't work with what you've already got. You may have something similar already, but the one tiny thing that makes this new thing different makes a big difference. And that's what this video is all about. Come watch how I went through a process to decide whether I need to keep all three of these very similar crafty goodies. I'll see you there. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.